So 11 Israeli hostages and 6 citizens from Thailand, we understand, have been exchanged inside Gaza. They're on their way to the Rafah crossing. Other news from yesterday, by the way, a little 4-year-old girl called Abigail Idan, who is a dual US Israeli citizen, was released. She lost, unfortunately, both of her parents during that attack on the 7th and had become very much the sort of focal point over in the States of some of the campaign. Joe Biden had spoken about her release, etc. Also, the UN say today that a second humanitarian route is going to open up into Gaza, so that is significant. With every day that goes by, and now that we're past the 4 days into the extension stage, there is a sort of paradox, if you like, built into this, because so far we've seen women and children and the elderly exchanged, but unfortunately there is a hierarchy of hostages when it comes to their value for Hamas. So every day that goes by and these women and children and elderly are released, we get closer to negotiations around men and then, crucially, soldiers. And that will become the moment of truth, I think, for both sides. Today, last night, I should say, 13 Israeli hostages were released, 39 Palestinian detainees. We caught up with one of those Palestinian families today. 17-year-old Mohammed Ahmed Owar, released from an Israeli prison last night, back home in East Jerusalem. His aunt gets to him first, then his mum, Islam. He does not let go of her. The teenager, now back with his family, is one of 39 Palestinians released in exchange for 13 Israeli hostages yesterday. He was accused of throwing a petrol bomb during disturbances last year, something he denies. He spent 16 months in prison, was expecting to spend almost 3 years inside. When news came through, he was on the list for release.
طبعا يعني هو الشعور مش راح ينوصف كلمة أو كلمتين زي ما حكينا قبل. الشعور فوق الخيال يعني. ما كناش متوقعينها ولا 1% إني في هذا اليوم أكون بين أهلي وأبط أمي اللي كنت مشتاق لها صار له 16 شهر. نفسي ألمس إيدها، نفسي ألمس وجهها، نفسي أشوف ريحتها، نفسي أكل من أكلها أو أي شيء ثاني.
As the war plays out, this family, like others, become the currency traded for a truce. Mohammed's release is bittersweet, because the attacks of the 7th of October opened up a whole new world of pain, both for Israelis and for Palestinians. One family's gain against the backdrop of catastrophic loss.
يعني حرام اللي عماله بيصير في غزة وفينا كمان، يعني غزة بيصير في عندها حرب يعني بالقنابل وبالدبابات. احنا برضه في القدس، اهل القدس عندنا حرب برضه، يعني ما في احترام، ما في تنكيل بالطلاب، في تنكيل في النساء.
The Owars live in the Silwan neighborhood, East Jerusalem. Israeli police warned them and others to keep celebrations low-key last night, and they did. In Ramallah, the West Bank, it was different. The Israelis have released 117 detainees in the last 3 days, but in the same time, they've detained 116 new Palestinian prisoners across the occupied West Bank. The raids and arrests here have intensified since the 7th of October. Israeli troops remain in the Gaza Strip and the truce is being extended. Yesterday was the smoothest day so far for its implementation. The largest consignment of aid trucks, no substantial delays, and the release of 14 Israelis, including 9 children. 8-year-old Ella El-Kaem and her 15-year-old sister Daphna reunited with their mother Mayan last night on an Israeli army base. Their abduction on the 7th was live-streamed by Hamas. The bodies of other family members found in the house where they were taken from. Winter is coming to Khan Yunis, southern Gaza. The Al-Mawasi neighborhood is where the Israelis are telling people to go for safety. Now a camp bursting at the seams, about to flood.
المطرة اليوم موجودة، شايفين الوضع، إذا ضلت على هيك كمان ربع ساعة رح تلاقي المجاري فطت على الناس، وهذه الأمور صعبة. النظافة قد ما بدك تجيب كادر تنظيف كامل ما رح تقدر. في علم الطوارئ احنا بنقول انه كل حمام بيسع الى 13 فرد في الطوارئ، احنا كل حمام فيما يقارب ال 300 فرد بيستنى دوره.
With the guns gone quiet for a time, the appeals for help from the displaced become deafening.
Well, I've been speaking to Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinian ambassador in the UK, for our series of long interviews with both sides on the forecast. I asked if he thinks Israel will have to give up its stated aim of destroying Hamas.
The stated aim of Israel is not really the real aim of Israel. The real aim of Israel has been outplayed in front of your own eyes, which is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and turning Gaza unlivable and making sure that no one can ever inhabit Gaza.
But its current stated war aim
it's an execution. I don't know
to
about
destroy Hamas. And you're saying they need to drop that?
No, they are not destroying anything. They're destroying our people and the entire Gaza, and they're doing the same in the West Bank. So it's the same blueprint. It's the same plan. The plan is to depopulate Gaza. That's the plan. Otherwise, why are you bombarding hospitals, schools, shelters, UN premises? You know what?
You know what they say to that? They say because Hamas are firing from those places.
Forget about them. Forget about them. They are. This is a classic design of ethnic cleansing, because they have made the north unlivable. These people who have been forced to leave, 1.7 million. 3 out of every 4 from our people in Gaza are now displaced. So you tell me the plan was to go after Hamas? The plan was to make sure that these people shall never return to their homes. And now the plan is to put them all together in one small part in the Gaza Strip, which is the south, to prepare for the push.
But in Israeli terms, they're being asked to accept defeat.
Hamas is not controlling the West Bank. So to sit here and tell me they are really after Hamas, they are after the Palestinian people.
But in their terms, they would say, you're asking us to accept defeat, that Hamas wins, that Hamas survives and stays in place, and we just stop.
Yeah, this terminology, defeat, does not apply here, because defeat is between 2 armies. Okay, I don't see 2 armies here. Israel cannot win this except when they end their occupation.
Right, but in order to convert a 4-day ceasefire into something lasting, what is the international mechanism that is required? What do you want?
We want the international community to stop the carnage, because it was a carnage. It has nothing to do with a fight or who wins and who loses. It's unprecedented level of savagery and barbarism. And nobody should talk about pauses. Pause what? You pause for a few days, you feed your children, then they resume mass killing them? This is unconscionable. We need to make sure that happens, and then we need to begin from yesterday an unprecedented, massive humanitarian corridors from all over the world, because the level of atrocities, the level of humanitarian catastrophe is unseen for generations, not only in Palestine, but worldwide. And then we need to make sure that there is accountability. Wars have rules, and wars must be under international accountability.
On both sides?
On all sides. And Israel has crossed every single line. Not once and not twice, and for 70. And today, whoever committed war crimes and crimes against humanity must be brought to international justice. Whoever.
But you accept that Hamas?
I accept whatever judges, when our international judges come, let them decide that, not you. Who's the occupier?
You didn't wait for the judges on Israel. You're prepared to judge Israel yourself?
No. We will wait. We will wait for the judges, and we have gone to the ICC, and we have gone to the ICJ, and we have been telling both of them, come and investigate war crimes from all sides.
They've just announced a 2-day extension while we've been speaking.
Good, that's good news. A glimpse of hope. A glimpse of hope.
But you want what you call a big bang.
Yes.
What is it?
A big bang is that you don't go for piecemeals here. You really, after the hopeless, helpless, terrifying moments of the last month and a half, you really need to give a shot in the arm and in the heart of the millions of people that tomorrow could be different. This is the time you recognize the state of Palestine, you empower the state, we have a government recognized in the UN, that is the PLO. The PLO will be in charge of making sure that it defends its people and it brings those criminals to the ICC. The ICC, the state of Palestine will be in charge of this huge humanitarian assistance, the reconstruction, and the state of Palestine will be convening and should be convening elections via its government so the Palestinian people decide. I think the status quo ante is an impossibility. That's why I call for a big bang, and it will only take a big bang to take all of us, not only the Palestinians, the Israelis, the region, and the world, take us out of this deep, deep tunnel, dark tunnel we are in right now.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
And we'll be speaking to a representative of the Israeli government in a moment. But first, earlier I spoke to Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta. He's a war surgeon who recently returned from Gaza after 41 days in the Strip. He held a press conference in Westminster this morning, after which I spoke to him, and I began by asking him to give us a sense of the conditions and injuries he was tackling on the ground.
So, Gaza used to have 36 hospitals. Now only 9 are functioning. And these 9 are struggling to provide treatment for over 35,000 wounded. And these patients with these wounds are at risk of losing their lives. These wounds are becoming infected every day as we speak. And there's a risk that these tens of thousands of wounded will die if the health system is not first rehabilitated and then its capacity increased.
I mean, give us a sense of what it was like day to day there when you were there.
We were so short of supplies, and the wounded were so overwhelming in terms of numbers that we were having to do procedures without anesthetic. I was forced to do dressing changes on massive wounds, excruciatingly painful wounds. There was a girl with just her whole body covered in shrapnel. She was 9. I ended up having to change and clean these wounds with no anesthetic and no analgesic. Managed to find some intravenous paracetamol to give her. And you know, her dad was crying, I was crying, and the poor child was screaming the place down.
I mean, you talk about a hospital system across Gaza that has essentially collapsed. Before that is rebuilt, a question we know that the Israelis have put to medical staff. You worked at Al-Shifa. There was a specific focus from the Israelis in their campaign that it was used as a base by Hamas. They showed footage which they claimed were tunnels operating under the hospital. They showed footage of weapons. They also made it pretty clear that staff must have known, in their view, what was going on. I just wonder what you would say to that, having worked at Al-Shifa.
So not only was I there on this war, but in previous wars. And in this war, as things started to collapse, I would go literally foraging for consumables, dressings from the different buildings that I thought had storage units in them, or some of the other operating rooms, so I could basically just get at the beginning of the day what I needed. And so I had complete access. You know, Shifa was a third world governmental hospital that looks no different than any other third world governmental hospital. But the question is, so if we put aside Shifa, why did they destroy the 4 children's hospital? Why did they destroy the cancer hospital? Why did they destroy Al-Ahli hospital?
And can I just finally ask you, given your commitment to Gaza, as you say, you've been there many times in terrible circumstances, what was it like for you coming out of there and leaving Gaza, leaving people behind?
It's you're overwhelmed with a sense of guilt, and you remember the patients that you weren't able to treat, and you remember the patients that still needed further treatment, and the colleagues that are left struggling. Even now, you kind of always remember those patients that you need, your patients. There's something about the way we're trained in this country. When we're trained as doctors in medical schools here and then in the NHS, which is called ownership, that they become your patients.
So very difficult for you to be watching from afar now.
Yes.
Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Mark Regev, who's a senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Regev, thanks very much for joining us this evening. Now, the Israelis have promised to continue extending the truce if Hamas continues to release hostages. So if things continue as they have been going over the last couple of days, this truce could be extended for many days. Is that your hope?
As if we can keep getting our hostages out, of course. Of course, that's my hope. The deal was negotiated with the help of the Americans and others. And the idea is over the first 4 days, 50 hostages have to be released, women and children. And then over every consecutive day, as you've reported, we will give an additional day of this humanitarian pause if 10 people are released. And it's my understanding that that's now on the table, and Israel supports that.
So theoretically, this truce could last for several days on those numbers. You know, the Israeli opposition to any sort of pause, any sort of ceasefire, even a brief one, was always that it would give Hamas time to regroup. Presumably that is a risk you now consider is worth taking.
Correct. What we're saying now is because we're getting the hostages out and we're prioritizing that, the risk about Hamas resting and rearming, it's a very real risk. It was discussed in our cabinet. Of course, we're taking, as I say, our calculated risk here. But we have a tangible benefit here. We're saving the life of 50 people and now possibly more. That was a risk worth taking. But I have no doubt that Hamas is using this pause to rest, to rearm, and to prepare to fight us in the future.
But at the same time that this truce is ongoing, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it extremely clear that there will be no end to the fighting, that the Israelis will return with what he calls full force. Well, what does full force look like exactly?
It means our goal remains the same. When the pause is over, we will continue our campaign until the Hamas military machine is destroyed and Hamas no longer rules the Gaza Strip. And the reason is quite simple. Israelis simply refuse to live any longer next to this terror enclave in constant fear of terrorists crossing the border and butchering our children like they did on October 7th. And that, I'd just like to say, that is what Hamas says it will do. Its leaders have said repeatedly that they would do the October 7th massacre again and again and again. We can't ignore the threat.
And it's a point been made many, many times. But do you, practically speaking, intend to do to the south of Gaza what has been done in the north, which is pretty much wholesale destruction with huge loss of life? Is that practically what full force looks like?
Well, Hamas can release all the hostages and disarm and voluntary surrender, and then there doesn't have to be any fighting at all.
But, I mean, the full force you talk about, I'm asking really explicitly, is it that you do to the south what you've done to the north?
We will hit Hamas hard, and we will at the same time make a maximum effort to minimize any collateral damage. We don't want to see civilian casualties. And it's
but the problem is, the reality is there are many, many civilian casualties, aren't there?
That's because
there
of
were many
Hamas's
in the north,
strategy.
and there will be many in the south.
That's because of Hamas's strategy to deliberately use the Gaza civilian population as a human shield for its war machine. And not just Israel says so. The UK government has said so. The European Union has said so. The United States has said so. There is a consensus in the international community that Hamas deliberately endangers its own people, the people of Gaza, brutalizing them. But there is growing
agreement in the international community as well. You talk about consensus, that the loss of life is simply too high. Now, you asked people to move out of the north into the south. Now you're telling them to move to the west of Khan Yunis, which is a tiny strip of what is already a tiny strip of land. The World Health Organization says nowhere and no one is safe in Gaza. Are you saying that is just the acceptable reality of what happens next?
No, we have passed to the international community specific zones in the southwest of Gaza, not far from the crossing where the aid is coming in, which are designated safer zones. We urge people to move there. I know it's difficult for people sometimes to move. I understand that. My father was a refugee himself. He had to move in wartime. But clearly, despite the difficulties in moving, we urge people to move because it's all a matter, of saving, getting out of a combat zone.
There's nowhere to move to for these people. For the huge number of people you are now expecting to move into a tiny strip of land. And the British government has already expressed the fact that they believe these safe areas may not be safe.
Well, we have talked about specific designated areas, and we're in a war here. So if you look for perfect solutions, you probably won't find them, not in any war. But in managing risks, just as we're managing our own risk, we urge the people of Gaza, please evacuate combat zones for your own safety.
Mark Regev.
It's common sense.
Mark Regev, sorry to cut you off. Thank you very much for talking to us this evening.
Thank you for having me.